Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. You know what to do. Sit back, relax, and stay sinful. Story number 1. When I was 10 or 11 and living in Singapore, I decided to walk my dog alone sometime after 10 p.m. There wasn't anyone around for most of the walk, but at one point I passed an Indian guy sitting on the steps of one of the houses. I waved at him because I thought he was a neighbor. Thinking back, he probably wasn't, since most people in that neighborhood were Singaporean, and in Singapore, it's pretty segregated. As I walk past the guy, he gets up and starts following me. I notice he's following me, so I speed up a bit, but that doesn't seem to work. So instead, I slow down, hoping he will pass me. When he catches up to me, he stops, and I do too. The man looks at me and just slowly wags his finger back and forth and says, "No, no, no," like you would imagine Pennywise would do. Then without doing anything else, he retreats into the shadows of a nearby playground, sits on a piece of equipment facing me. I quickly walk home and tell my parents what happened. Singapore is considered a pretty safe place, so I felt safe walking around that night. My dog didn't react to the guy at all, and he is a dachshund, so not much of a guard dog. The creepiest part is that I still have no idea why that guy did that, and it's just so creepy and confusing. Story number 2. This story happened a few months after Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico, leaving most of the island without power, water, and telephone systems. Thankfully, 911 was still reachable. During this time, I was living alone on a ground level of a small apartment complex in the middle of a rural area. I didn't have a power generator at the time, so most of my things were charged via solar panels. One night, I was suddenly woke up by a blood-curdling scream from outside my window. I couldn't make out the words, and the person was saying, or rather, screaming. I thought it was a person needing help, but I quickly discovered it wasn't. At first I heard the screams from afar, but then the screams became louder and louder until it reached one of my windows. It was then when I discovered that it wasn't a cry for help. It was a ruse. I quietly grabbed a knife from my kitchen and a flashlight which I left off. Without making a sound, I checked the window once again. He was still there screaming. The neighborhood dogs began to howl as in response. It was mortifying. After what I describe as the longest 10 minutes of my life, the man left, screaming gibberish at the top of his lungs. I waited a while and then grabbed a cell phone, which I kept turned off for emergencies, and dialed 911. After a few minutes, the police came, but didn't manage to catch the man. Story number 3. This happened about 5 years ago, but it was such a traumatic experience for me that I remember most of the events in pretty vivid detail. I have PTSD from the experience still that sometimes demobilizes me when I'm home alone, and I only feel safe in a place when I know I have something to defend myself with in every room. I lived in a small ground floor basement apartment building, briefly in college with my now ex-boyfriend Ryan and another roommate. The small apartment building faced another identical one, and the drive sloped down by quite a bit to the other side of our building. The front of our basement apartment was mostly below ground level, but the back was fully exposed and had a back door that opened into a wooded area that you could get to from the parking lot. The front door was inside the building, and you had to go down a flight of stairs from the main front entrance to get to it. We'd been living there for about a month when I was doing laundry one stormy night. Strange things started to happen. The laundry room was right across the hall, and I'd walk back across to grab more quarters, say something to my boyfriend quickly, so I hadn't closed the front door all the way. I was talking to my boyfriend when I saw the door move a little. I thought it was a change in air pressure from the front door to the building being opened, so I kept talking but kept an eye on it. Then I watched as it opened by a few more inches. I told my boyfriend to come over and he rounded the corner, just in time to see it open by several more inches. "I see it," he said and ran out the door. Our front door was at the end of a pretty long hallway, and the door was hung in such a way that I couldn't see who had been standing on the other side. Ryan came back and said that he'd chased after them, just in time to see a white tennis shoe and a pale but really hairy leg going up the stairs, and that it looked like they'd gone out the front door of the building, but it was dark and pouring out and he couldn't find anyone. We kind of shook it off because we lived near campus and thought some idiot had stumbled home drunk, tried to go into the wrong apartment. 2 or 3 weeks later, it stormed again. This was a really janky college apartment that only had a window, AC in the living room, and it was September and still very hot. We always had to sleep with the bedroom doors open to get some airflow from the AC. The next morning, I walked into the bathroom to take a shower and saw a bunch of dead bugs in the bathtub, as well as mud and what looked like a footprint. I was mad and thought Alice had opened the little window in the shower the night before when it was raining, and the rain had just swept in some dead bugs off the window track. I was noticing at that point that she did some weird voyeuristic things, like opening the window in the shower while she was showering, and leaving her blinds open at night while she had guys in her room. It wasn't until a few days later that Ryan and I were walking down the slope out the front and noticed a twisted window screen laying in the grass right outside our window. I picked it up and my heart absolutely sank. It looked like it had been ripped out of the window. I walked inside and asked Alice about the mud in the bathtub and the footprints as well as the dead bugs. She said she hadn't opened the window any time recently. I suddenly put 2 and 2 together and realized that someone had pulled the screen out of the window and come in that night. This person must have brushed the dead bugs off the window track and left muddy footprints in our bathtub. The scariest part is that we had been sleeping with the door open that night. We looked all around the apartment and couldn't find anything that might have been stolen. Our TV and laptops had been sitting right out in the living room, and they didn't look like they had been touched. We called the police. They came and took a statement and left, but they said since nothing had been taken, there wasn't much they could do. I could tell at that time that they thought we were overreacting and didn't really believe that anyone had come inside. We had all old windows in the apartment that slid open horizontally, but didn't lock properly. My boyfriend and I put a heavy stick in each of the windowsills. One night we were up late playing a board game and I went to use the bathroom. Saw the shadow of the stupid note on the window and went back. Alice went to use the bathroom a few minutes later, came back hysterical because a note had been ripped off. We called the police and they stopped by to take another statement. They said they were going to look around the neighborhood. Since the first note had worked so well, Ryan, for reasons I can't fathom, decided to put up another sign, this time on a bright green note card. He opened the window, yelled, and slammed it shut. I had just time to catch a glimpse of something white right outside the window, next to his face. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack because I thought I could see a face at the window, but Ryan said it had been a pair of white shoes, and they had looked the same as the ones on the person who had tried to come in before. He still put the sign up against my pleading. I called the police back and they were back within a couple minutes, looking annoyed. Apparently they had been just about to pull out of the parking lot when the call came back from the dispatcher. I explained to them there was enough of a slope right next to the window. If someone was standing there and there were cars parked in the parking spots, you wouldn't be able to see them from the street. One of them told us that he was going to wait around for a bit in his car to see if he could see any suspicious activity. It was a while later when he came back and told us that he hadn't seen anything, and that he even checked the hoods of the cars outside for warmth to see if anyone had been running recently. I asked him if he had seen anything else like this recently. He said he did believe us because he could see how shaken we all were. Maybe this person was just bored and messing with us. I kept reiterating the length of time between these events and the fact that nothing had been stolen out of our apartment when they had more than likely entered the other night. He then admitted that the person could be mentally ill and had possibly developed an unhealthy obsession with one of us. The officer suggested some ways to improve our home security and left for the night. After he had left, we decided to stay up. We spent the night being pretty quiet listening for sounds. I want to say it was maybe an hour later. Ryan looked over at the back door and then I heard, "Oh no!" And I saw a piece of something bright green poking through the back door. He opened the door slightly and pulled through a green note card that had been somehow stuffed through space between the door and frame. We had been sitting quietly the whole time and hadn't heard the screen door open. He looked outside and didn't see anyone. I became convinced at that point that this person was having fun messing with us. I was pretty terrified by the fact they hadn't been scared of the police's presence. I strongly suspected at that point that the pink note card sign was going to make its way back to us, and I wanted to catch them in the act, so we all positioned ourselves looking in different directions, staking out the exits. It must have been another hour that passed before we finally got sick of sitting there and stood up and started getting ready for bed. This conversation maybe went on for 5 or 10 minutes. When I looked back at the front door, which I had been watching, the pink note card was laying on the floor, slipped under the door. Things escalated by quite a bit in the remaining time there. For the next month, we'd wake up to the sound of the windows getting pounded on, or it would happen when we turned on the lights in certain rooms. We installed a motion detector by the back door, but it never once went off for anyone other than us. The parking lot was poorly lit and so was a wooded area out back, so I put the brightest bulbs I could out by the back door. I came out one morning to find the light bulbs smashed and the metal light carvings missing. We eventually found them out a few feet into the woods, smashed like someone had stomped on them. Every light bulb we put out after that got smashed. I had to walk home from work because none of us had cars, and I spotted the shadow of a male figure standing by the identical building across from ours. When they noticed I had spotted them, they took off running. This happened several more times to my boyfriend and roommate, where they would see the shape of someone out back, and that person would take off running behind the garages or into the woods. I woke up pretty early one morning when it was still dark to work on homework. I saw a light coming through the living room window, like someone was trying to see through the slots on the blinds with a flashlight, which we thankfully had curtains to block. Everything came to a head one night when Ryan and I decided to run to Walmart with a friend. Alice had a really ridiculous habit for drinking while she was cleaning at the apartment. I discovered by that point that she had pretty serious problems with mixing her meds and alcohol. She also enjoyed leaving the back door open because she didn't like the smell of cleansing products. I'd asked her numerous times not to do so, obviously because of all the issues we had been having. We got to Walmart and I'm standing in the hair aisle when I start getting all these frantic texts from Alice telling me to call her. I called her and she was hysterical, said 2 guys just tried to come in and that we needed to come home now. The police are on their way. Apparently she had opened the door as soon as we had left, even though I told her absolutely not to leave it unlocked. 2 guys had walked in through the screen door. She'd apparently screamed at the top of her lungs and covered her face. When she looked up, they were gone. She was pretty drunk by that point, and I strongly suspected she was also high from mixing it with their medication. The police were there by the time we got back, and I watched. My heart sank when the officer described the 2 men. They were the same men that I had seen. She was absolutely hysterical by that point, clearly under the influence. So she kept getting tripped up by questions the police asked and changing her answers. What we got out of it was that there were 2 white males, one taller and blonde and the other slightly shorter, but pale with dark black hair. Ryan's friend, who had been at Walmart with us, said the description fit 2 guys that had walked into the restaurant that he and Ryan worked at a couple weeks prior. He said the 2 men walked in, looked around and tried to see who was in the kitchen area. Then they left. He only remembered it because of how suspiciously they were behaving, but he didn't have a whole lot of details on them either. I moved out shortly after that. Ryan left to go to a different college. We broke up and I didn't want to stick around alone in a place where I felt like my life was in constant danger. I also didn't want to live with someone who wasn't going to take home security seriously, and advised Alice to also move. My best guess at this point is that 2 guys lived in one of the surrounding buildings because of how they were able to disappear and reappear so suddenly. It's only conjecture, but I think that because I must have personally seen Alice bring around 30 guys back to the apartment in the time she lived there. One of them might have been someone she met at a bar, or someone who might have watched everything that went on in her room. I can't prove any of that, and it bothers me endlessly that I don't have an answer. We were never able to even get close enough to catching them because of the layout of the apartment building and because their attacks were so random. I live in the same small town, and the sight of those woods in my old apartment building still gives me goosebumps. I never got to find out who they were or what they wanted, and that bothers me to no end. It brought chills to my bones just recounting everything, and I don't think I've ever truly felt safe being home alone again. That's an absolutely horrifying final story in this video. Can't imagine living in such fear on a daily basis. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Halloween is next Thursday, 8 days from now. In the comment section below, let me know what you guys are dressing up as, what your Halloween plans are, if you're going to attend a fun party, if you're going to stay at home, roll a joint, who cares? Let me know what your plans are for this Hallows Eve next Thursday. Oh yeah. Stay sinful. La 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 la.